Nazism, a modern political movement with its echoes of pagan Rome, spawned a creed not of love but of hate, not compassion but despair. The rise of the Nazis meant death to millions of Jews, including 2/3 of those who lived in Europe. The origins of Nazism are complex, but it began in a country shaped by centuries of Christian culture. How did the cross become twisted into the swastika by the followers of Adolf Hitler? The early followers of Jesus were in fact Jewish. Jesus lived and died professing himself a Jew. His mother, the Virgin Mary, his followers, Peter and Paul, and the first apostles, all were Jewish. The Psalms, prayers, and festivals of Christianity are of Jewish origin. At the Last Supper, Jesus and his disciples were celebrating the Jewish feast of Passover. Jews disagreed about Jesus. Some believed him a Messiah, fulfilling a Jewish prophecy. Most Jews did not. This difference pitted one group against the other and made the Roman authorities arbitrators of the conflict. In the Roman Empire, Rome could not be blamed for the death of Jesus. As the Testaments were written, the Romans were absolved, and the Jews were blamed. Later, these writings would be considered the revealed truth. In the New Testament, St. Paul says,
"The Jews who killed the Lord Jesus and the prophets and drove us out. The Jews who are heedless of God's will and enemies of their fellow men hinder us from speaking to the Gentiles to lead them to salvation. And now retribution has overtaken them for good and all."
These texts came to justify anti-Semitism, and still do today.
Alors ce que nous reprochons aux Juifs, alors là, clairement,
we openly reproach the Jews for their lack of faith when they crucified Christ. But that's all in the gospel. One is either a Catholic or not a Catholic. If one's a Catholic, one uses the same terms about the Jews as St. Paul. And St. Paul said they crucified Christ. They put to death the fount of life. They prevented the preaching of the gospel for fear that they would lose their power in the world. After all, it's very clear. It's all in St. Paul.
In the rivalry between religions, no other religion in the world makes the accusation that Christianity makes against the Jews that they are literally murderers of God. When you ask what does it mean to be a murderer of God, then you have to say that it means to kick over all moral traces. To be a murderer of God means to be the opponent of anything decent, anything humane, anything moral, anything ethical.
After the Jewish revolts of 70 AD, the Roman army forced the Jews out of Palestine, dispersing them throughout the empire. They carried with them the blame for killing the Christian God. Jews became a people without a country, a minority, mistrusted, the other. Over time, Christianity flourished. By the 4th century, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Church fathers condemned the Jews as an accursed people, rejected by God. Among the more virulent was St. John Chrysostom.
The synagogue is not only a brothel and a theatre, it is also a den of robbers and a lodging for wild beasts. The Jews themselves are demons. They are the common disgrace and infection of the whole world.
This kind of virulence was limited to the church. Outside the church, Jews lived in fragile harmony with their neighbors, respected as shopkeepers, physicians, and international traders. This changed in 1095 when Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade against the Muslims. He called on Christian princes to win back the Holy Land from the infidel. The Christian Crusades unleashed the worst catastrophe the Jews had ever known. The Jews were seen as treacherous auxiliaries of the Muslims, infidels who lived right in the heart of Christian Europe.
Let us first avenge ourselves on them and exterminate them from among the nations, so that the name of Israel will no longer be remembered. Or let them adopt our faith.
In 1096, crusading mobs destroyed Jewish communities in northern France, throughout the valley of the Rhine, in towns along the Danube, and in Bohemia. When the Crusaders arrived in Jerusalem, they burnt the synagogue to the ground, with all the Jews inside. An eyewitness recorded what happened when the Crusaders stormed the Temple Mount.
Men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins. It was a just and splendid judgment by God that this place should be filled with the blood of the unbelievers.
Christianity, uncompromising and extreme, surged across Europe, bringing bitter hardship to the Jews. When Richard the Lionheart was crowned King of England, Jews were massacred throughout the country. In the city of York, Jews who sought refuge in a castle were surrounded and slaughtered by a Christian mob. In 1215, Pope Innocent III decreed that Jews must wear yellow badges to distinguish them from other people. At Easter time, the clergy encouraged Christians to throw stones at Jews, a punishment for failing to accept Christ as God. Eventually, these punishments became so severe that the crime was made to fit them.
Certainly since the First Crusade, there has been profound guilt on the part of non-Jews, particularly on the part of the Gentile Church. Because at the time of the First Crusade, you had the massacre of all Jews and incidentally Muslims in Jerusalem. As soon as the Crusaders managed to breach the walls in 1099, on the way you have tens of thousands of Jews massacred in the most brutal fashion by the crusading armies. And it's not a coincidence, I believe, that within just over a generation of those terrible massacres of Jews by Christian Gentiles, for the first time, such massacres, you have developed the myth that Jews massacre Christian children and use their blood for making the unleavened bread for Passover.
The legend of ritual murder was rejected by some popes, embraced by others. Here in the Austrian Tyrol, a Catholic church still displays the remains of a child, Andrel of Rhyn, canonized in 1755 by a papal bull. It claims the child was killed by Jews in a Passover ritual.
There was a Jewish sect who drank children's blood. A Jewish sect. It's a fact.
Jesus was separated from Judaism, and Jews were forbidden to practice most trades, excluded from guilds, and forbidden to own land. But they were allowed to lend money. The consequences would be profound.
The image of usury, the image of a person charging exorbitant interest, is really quite an arresting image on cathedrals and in other media. I may not be voicing the general opinion here. I think it is the most potent stereotype, the most potent. I think that it's particularly potent because every day in medieval Europe, hundreds or even thousands of times, people went to Jews to pawn very precious objects to them. And what we have to think about as historians or modern-day people is what that relationship meant. It's not simply, by the way, a question of humiliation by an other who is supposedly, who should be lower in the social hierarchy. We have to imagine people going to the Jew, and very frequently, by the way, it's women, Christian women, going to Jewish women to borrow money, and pawning things like wedding rings or jewelry, things that are very precious. I mean, they may not be intrinsically valuable, but very precious to them. And we have to imagine a situation in which they don't really get very much for what they're pawning. I mean, if we use our historical imagination that way, then we see a person walking away from that relationship, a Christian walking away from that relationship, in which the only thing he or she can say is, damn it, you know, why did I have to do this? Why did I have to give it up? Why did I have to borrow money from a Jew? Why didn't she or he give me more money for this piece of bedding that I pawned? Why am I in this relationship? And from my point of view, that is the sort of thing that's transferred to children. That's the sort of thing that makes it possible to believe all these other sorts of things about Jews. The Jew is a person who in normal human relationships really does mess things up, really does make life kind of hell on earth.